They ignored the fact that you got chartered flights because of this girl. They ignored the fact that ratings were going through the roof because of this girl. Instead, they resented it because they said, yo, we were doing stuff long before Caitlin Clark got here, and y'all wasn't paying attention then. But now the young white girl comes along, and y'all want to sit up there and shower all of this praise and all of this attention that was earned before she ever came along. The resentment is understandable, but it's not about Caitlin Clark. It's about what she represents. My point.
5 minutes ago, Stephen A. Smith did the unthinkable. He completely obliterated Angel Reese on live television, and what he said will send shockwaves through the entire WNBA. This wasn't just criticism. This was a surgical takedown that exposed everything wrong with how some players have treated the league's biggest star. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why Stephen had just delivered the reality check that the WNBA desperately needed.
You've been saying up and down that, whether tacitly or directly, that, she's getting too much shine, even though we respect and what have you. We deserve our shine. Well, now's a perfect opportunity for you to prove that. If not, acknowledge her impact on the financial aspects that she brings to the table, adopt the mentality that a rising tide lifts all boats, and learn to have an elevated level of appreciation for what she has brought to the game and assist her in making the league.
But before we dive into this explosive moment, we need to understand how we got here. Because this story isn't just about one heated exchange. It's about jealousy, resentment, and the complete failure to recognize greatness when it's staring you right in the face. The tension had been building for months. Ever since Caitlin Clark stepped foot in the WNBA, there's been an undercurrent of bitterness that nobody wanted to talk about openly. Players who had been grinding in relative obscurity for years suddenly watched the—
You stepped out of your house. You are now Angel Reese, and you will always be picked apart, unfortunately.
She knows this social media. She is not dumb. She's quite a brilliant young lady. She's very smart, very accomplished. And on top of it all, she is in this age where she does know social media exists, and she has exploited it to her advantage. And so when you take that into consideration, that means you're mindful of the imagery and the perception that you're assisting in creating.
This young rookie transform their entire league overnight. Chartered flights that they never had before suddenly materialized because of Clark. Television ratings that had been flatlining for years skyrocketed because people wanted to watch her play. Merchandise sales that barely registered exploded to levels nobody had ever seen. And how did some players react to this windfall that benefited everyone? With gratitude? With excitement about the rising tide lifting all boats? Absolutely not. They resented every single second of it. The resentment wasn't really about Caitlin Clark, the person. It was about what she represented. Here was someone who walked into their world and immediately became the center of attention. The face of their league, the reason sponsors were suddenly cutting bigger checks. Veterans who—
Lines announcing shock injury. Keyword: shock. This injury was shocking, but not for reasons
who had been working for years felt invisible, overlooked, forgotten. They watched this phenomenon unfold, and instead of embracing it, they chose to resist it. Stephen A. Smith had been watching this toxic dynamic play out in real time, and he'd been warning people for months that this jealousy was going to backfire spectacularly. He saw how some players were treating Clark on the court, not just as competition, but with a level of hostility that went beyond normal basketball. He watched as legends threw passive-aggressive shade, as current players made snide comments, and as the league's leadership acted like Clark's success was some kind of happy accident rather than the miracle they'd been praying for. But nobody could have predicted what happened next. The league
that for months. Now we get to turn around and look and see what exactly is it that the league
had finally found its golden ticket, its one-woman ratings machine, its path to mainstream relevance, managed to fumble it in the most devastating way possible. Caitlin Clark, the player who had single-handedly dragged women's basketball into the national spotlight, was suddenly sidelined with an injury. And not just any injury, one that came after months of being targeted, fouled hard, and subjected to what can only be described as systematic physical intimidation. The numbers don't lie about what
Average 17,035 fans at home and over 15,000 on the road. 4 teams moved home games to bigger arenas when Indiana came to town to accommodate more fans. That's about Caitlin Clark. How do we know this? Attendance for the entire league was up nearly 50% last year. According to data from across the timeline, and Indiana led all teams with an average attendance of 17,035. That was up 309.
Clark meant to this league. When she played, games averaged over 1 million viewers. Without her, the audience dropped to less than 400,000. That's not a decline, that's a complete collapse. Teams that had moved their games to bigger arenas specifically for Clark's visits were now staring at half-empty stadiums. Ticket prices that had soared were suddenly cut in half, with entire sections going unsold. And in the middle of this crisis, while the league was hemorrhaging viewers and revenue, what does Angel Reese do? She pulls what Stephen A. Smith would later call the most...
We'll find out. We don't know yet, but I'm going to be really, really interested in seeing, Molly, what kind of effect this has on the WNBA's ratings, because if for some reason there is a precipitous drop-off, then everybody needs to stand down and recognize the fact that the speculation or the assertions and assumptions about her being the golden goose is
tone-deaf stunt in recent memory. While Caitlin Clark was dealing with a legitimate injury that had fans genuinely worried about her health and the future of women's basketball, Reese conveniently developed her own injury issues. But here's where it gets interesting, and where Stephen A. Smith's radar went off completely. This wasn't just bad timing. This looked like a calculated move to hijack attention during Clark's absence.
Back, Caitlin. If you're going to break a record, to me, if it's legitimate, you have to break that record in the same amount of time that that player set it.
Okay.
Right? So if Kelsey Plum set that record in 4 years, well, Caitlin should have broke that record in 4 years. But because there's a COVID year and then there's another year, you know what I mean? So she's already had an extra year to break that record. So is it truly a broken record?
Angel Reese has always been savvy about social media and marketing herself. She's intelligent, accomplished, and knows exactly how to work the media landscape to her advantage, which is why Stephen A. Smith found her latest move so infuriating, because someone that's smart, someone that aware of optics and perception, had to know exactly how this would look. The optics were terrible. While the league's biggest draw was genuinely hurt and fans were genuinely concerned.
You bring up other rookies as well.
No league's ever about one player. That player could get hurt or whatever. So I think it's just to give recognition that in sports, people watch for compelling content and rivalries, and you can't.
There was Reese seemingly manufacturing her own injury storyline. It reeked of opportunism, of trying to capitalize on a moment when she should have been supporting her fellow player and the league that Clark had elevated. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't going to let this slide. Not when he'd spent months defending the importance of protecting Clark. Not when he'd been warning about the consequences of treating your biggest star like she was disposable. And definitely not when he saw what looked like someone trying to make Clark's genuine injury about themselves. What happened next was television gold, and social media dynamite rolled into one explosive moment. Stephen A. Smith didn't just criticize Angel Reese. He systematically dismantled her entire approach to this situation. He called out the timing. He called out the optics. He called out what he saw as a pattern of attention-seeking behavior that was completely inappropriate given the circumstances. You want to know what leadership looks like? Smith thundered. Leadership is recognizing when someone else is carrying your entire sport on their shoulders and supporting them, not competing with them for sympathy when they're actually hurt. But he wasn't done. Smith went deeper, addressing the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about. The racial dynamics that had been simmering beneath the surface of all this drama. He acknowledged that there was legitimate resentment about how much attention Clark received, and he understood where some of that frustration came from. But he also delivered a devastating truth bomb. I get it, Smith said. I understand the frustration. You've been working hard for years, and suddenly this young player comes in and gets all the spotlight. But let me tell you something. That spotlight isn't just shining on her. It's illuminating the entire league. Those chartered flights you're enjoying, that's because of her. Those bigger paychecks you're getting, that's because she brought the eyeballs, that brought the sponsors, that brought the money. The numbers Stephen A. Smith rattled off were staggering and impossible to argue with. Clark's debut game drew 2.7 million viewers, the most watched WNBA game in ESPN history. Her presence lifted the entire league's attendance by nearly 50%. The Indiana Fever went from drawing sparse crowds to averaging over 17,000 fans per game. Teams were literally moving to bigger arenas when Clark came to town because demand was so high. And then Smith delivered the knockout punch that had social media exploding within minutes. Angel Reese wants to be mentioned in the same breath as Caitlin Clark. Then act like it. Clark makes people rearrange their dinner plans to watch her play. Reese makes people reach for the remote. Clark brings families to the arena who never cared about women's basketball before. Reese brings drama that nobody asked for. There's levels to this game, and pretending there aren't levels doesn't make you equal. It makes you delusional. The reaction was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with clips of Smith's takedown. Fans who had been frustrated with what they saw as Reese's attention-seeking behavior finally felt like someone with a major platform was saying what they'd been thinking. But it also sparked a fierce debate about fairness, about how female athletes are criticized differently, about the pressure of living in someone else's shadow. But Stephen A. Smith wasn't backing down. He doubled down on his central point. This wasn't about personality or style or even talent. This was about impact and results. And the results were crystal clear. When Caitlin Clark plays, the WNBA matters. When she doesn't, it struggles for relevance. That's not an opinion. That's measurable fact backed by television ratings, attendance figures, merchandise sales, and social media engagement. The league had spent decades trying to break into the mainstream conversation, and Clark did it in a single season. Smith's broader message was even more devastating because it was so obviously true. The WNBA had been given a gift, a generational talent who could transcend their sport and bring it to a completely new audience. Instead of protecting that gift, celebrating it, and building around it, too many people in and around the league had spent their time resenting it. You know what's really sad about all this? Smith continued. Caitlin Clark didn't just elevate her own game or even just her own team. She elevated everyone. Every player in that league is benefiting from what she brought to the table. And instead of gratitude, instead of recognition, instead of support, some people chose jealousy and petty drama. The timing of Smith's comments couldn't have been more perfect. With Clark sidelined and her absence already showing in declining ratings and attendance, his words carried extra weight. It was like he was presenting evidence to a jury, and the evidence was overwhelming. The league that had finally found its breakthrough star had failed to protect her. The players who had benefited from her success had failed to support her. And now, with her temporarily out of the picture, everyone was getting a harsh lesson in just how much they had been taking for granted. But Smith saved his most pointed criticism for last. He addressed the elephant in the room that everyone had been dancing around, the fact that some of the hostility toward Clark seemed to go beyond normal competitive rivalry. Let's be real about what we're seeing here, Smith said. This isn't just about basketball. This is about someone who doesn't look like everyone else coming in and changing everything. And instead of celebrating that change, instead of embracing the success that benefits everyone, we're seeing resentment and resistance. The implications were clear and uncomfortable. Smith was suggesting that at least some of the negativity toward Clark was rooted in factors that had nothing to do with her basketball ability or her impact on the league. And his criticism of Angel Reese was part of a larger indictment of an attitude that he saw as self-destructive. As clips of Stephen A. Smith's takedowns spread across social media, the responses revealed just how divided people were on this issue. Clark supporters felt vindicated. Finally, someone with a major platform was calling out what they saw as unfair treatment of their favorite player. But others pushed back, arguing that Smith was being unfair to Reese and other players who were just trying to get their own recognition. But the numbers don't care about feelings or fairness. They tell a story that's impossible to ignore. The WNBA with Caitlin Clark is a legitimate sports entertainment product that can compete for mainstream attention. Without her, it returns to being a niche product with a small, dedicated following. Stephen A. Smith's message was ultimately about recognizing reality and responding to it appropriately. The reality is that Caitlin Clark is a transcendent talent who has given the WNBA something it had never had before: genuine mainstream relevance. The appropriate response is to protect, celebrate, and build around that talent, not to resent it or try to diminish it. And his criticism of Angel Reese was really criticism of an approach that puts individual ego ahead of collective benefit. Because at the end of the day, everyone in the WNBA is better off when Caitlin Clark is healthy and playing. The ratings are higher, the attendance is better, the paychecks are bigger, and the future is brighter. As this story continues to unfold, one thing is certain: Stephen A. Smith just delivered the reality check that the WNBA needed to hear, even if it wasn't what everyone wanted to hear. The league has been given a gift in Caitlin Clark. The question now is whether they'll learn to appreciate that gift before it's too late.